I was never close to my boss, not in the way some people become friends with their employers. He was just a man I worked for, stern, demanding, but fair. We never shared much beyond the job, but I respected him. His name was Henry Barker, and he ran the logging company I had worked for since I was 20. It had been 3 months since Henry passed. A heart attack, they said. He had always been a tough man, strong for his age, but he was in his 60s, and years of stress and long days in the wilderness had probably caught up with him. They found him at his campsite, a small spot deep in the woods, far off the main roads, where he liked to go on weekends. It was a quiet place, hidden in the thick forest, only accessible by an old dirt trail that most people had forgotten about. I had only been there once, years ago. Henry had taken a few of us out there to help him clear some fallen trees. I remembered how still it was, how the trees pressed in from every direction. No phone signal, no roads in sight, just miles of wilderness. After he passed, I hadn't thought much about that campsite until I had to drive past it one night. I still worked for the company, though things weren't the same without Henry. His son had taken over, a younger guy with none of his father's patience. The work was piling up, and the new boss didn't care much for safety or common sense. That was how I ended up on a late-night run, driving a loaded truck back from a remote job site. It had been raining on and off all day, and by the time I was halfway home, the roads were slick with mud. I wasn't supposed to be out this late, but the job had run long, and I didn't have a choice. I took the back roads, the ones I knew well, even in the dark. It wasn't until I checked the GPS that I realized where I was. About 10 miles from Henry's old campsite. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. It was just another place in the woods. But something about that stretch of road felt different now that he was gone. I told myself it was just because I knew what had happened. A man dying out there alone. It was enough to make anyone feel uneasy. Still, I kept driving. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with mist, curling along the road like smoke. My headlights cut through it, but the world beyond was just trees and shadows. Then I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was just the rain playing tricks on me, dark shapes shifting in the mist. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else. A car, parked off the side of the road, right near the turnoff to Henry's campsite. It was an old truck, one I didn't recognize. The doors were shut, but something about it felt wrong. I slowed down, not sure why. There was no reason for anyone to be out here this late. That was when I saw the footprints. Mud covered the ground, and there were deep tracks leading from the truck into the woods, toward Henry's campsite. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Whoever it was, it wasn't my business. But something about it gnawed at me. I knew this area well enough to know that anyone heading into those woods at night wasn't making a smart choice. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, wipers scraping across the windshield. Then, against my better judgment, I pulled over. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, stepped out into the cold night air, and followed the tracks. The mud was deep, my boots sinking with every step. The forest was silent, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. I moved slow, scanning the trees, following the tracks. They led straight down the old path toward Henry's campsite. Then I saw it light, a small glow, barely visible through the trees. Someone had a fire going. I should have turned back. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I kept going, the trees closing in around me. The air smelled like damp earth and old wood, the way the forest always did after a rain. The firelight flickered ahead, casting long shadows. Then I saw the tent. It wasn't Henry's old setup. This was something new. A dark green tent, zipped shut, sitting near the remains of Henry's old fire pit. Someone had been here recently. I stepped closer, my boots crunching against the wet ground. That was when I noticed something odd. The fire wasn't fresh. It was dying, barely more than embers now. Whoever was here had been here for a while. Then I saw the knife. It was stuck into a tree stump near the fire, half buried in the wood. A hunting knife, old but sharp. And next to it, a backpack half unzipped with clothes spilling out. The whole thing felt wrong. I turned back toward the trail, ready to leave, but then I heard it, branches snapping somewhere behind me. I froze. The sound was close, too close. I clicked off my flashlight, backing up toward the tent. My heart was hammering in my chest. Someone was out there. I listened, barely breathing. More footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then, in the dim firelight, I saw movement. A shape in the trees standing just at the edge of the light. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, bolting for the trail. The mud slowed me down, my boots slipping with every step. Behind me, I heard movement. Fast, heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the road, lungs burning, heart pounding. The trees blurred past me, the path twisting in the dark. Then I saw the headlights, my truck. I stumbled onto the road, throwing myself into the driver's seat. The door slammed shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. Then I saw it, movement in the trees, just at the edge of the road. The figure had stopped, standing at the tree line, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I still couldn't see a face, just a dark shape against the trees. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into gear and floored it, tires spinning against the wet road. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the main highway. I never found out who was out there. The next day, I called the sheriff, told him what I saw. He said he'd send someone out, but I never heard anything back. I didn't push it. I kept thinking about Henry, about the way he died out there, alone. And I wondered if maybe he hadn't been alone after all. I never took that road again, never went near that campsite. Some things I decided were better left alone. I had been looking forward to that camping trip for weeks. It was late September, just as the weather had started cooling down, but before the deep cold of autumn settled in. I had some time off from work, and I figured it would be the perfect opportunity to escape from everything for a while. I wasn't new to camping. I'd done plenty of solo trips before, and I liked the solitude. There was something about being out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but nature, that made me feel more at peace than I ever did in the city. I chose a spot deep in the mountains, far away from any official campsites. I didn't want to deal with other people, just the quiet of the wilderness. The drive out there was long, about 4 hours, and the last hour of it was on rough, winding dirt roads that barely seemed used. Eventually, I found a clearing nestled between thick trees, about a quarter mile from a small river. It was perfect, remote, quiet, and untouched. After parking my truck off to the side, I spent the first hour setting up camp. I pitched my tent, gathered firewood, and made sure everything was in place. The sun was still up when I finished, casting long golden rays through the treetops. I sat by the fire pit I'd built, feeling satisfied. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and earth all around me. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It felt good to be out there, away from everything. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I had a decent fire going. I cooked some food, ate in silence, and let the warmth of the flames keep the creeping cold at bay. The forest around me darkened quickly, the trees turning into looming shadows. I wasn't afraid of the dark. Not out here. I'd camped enough to know the sounds of the woods at night, the way they came alive with the noises of insects and small animals. But as the hours passed, something started to feel off. At first, I couldn't quite place it. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and noticed that the usual night sounds had quieted. The distant hoots of owls, the rustling of small creatures moving through the underbrush. It was all gone. The silence was heavy, pressing down on the clearing like a weight. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overthinking things. Sometimes the woods just got quiet. Maybe a predator was nearby, a coyote, a mountain lion, something that had scared the smaller animals into hiding. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned my head slowly, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. The trees stood still, their trunks black against the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. Nothing moved. No branches swayed, No leaves rustled. But the feeling remained, an itch in the back of my mind that refused to go away. After a while, I forced myself to stand. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the trees, looking for any sign of movement. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but empty forest. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head at myself. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Still, just to be sure, I took my rifle out of the truck and kept it close. I wasn't paranoid, but I wasn't stupid either. If something was out there, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. The night stretched on, the fire burning down to glowing embers. I forced myself to relax, crawling into my tent and zipping it up. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening. The silence outside was thick, unnatural. I could hear my own breathing, steady but tense. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves. It was close, too close, right outside my tent. I held my breath, my entire body going rigid. Another footstep followed, slow and deliberate. Not an animal. Animals moved with quick, darting motions. This was something different, something that knew I was here. I reached for my rifle, gripping it tightly. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear? No, bears didn't move like that. Person? That was almost worse. I hadn't seen a single other soul out here all day. Who would be walking around my campsite in the middle of the night? The footsteps stopped. For a long time, I didn't move. I just lay there, gripping the rifle, listening. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I knew something was out there, just beyond the thin fabric of the tent, standing in the dark, watching. Then, slowly, the footsteps started again. But they weren't moving away. They were circling the tent. My grip on the rifle tightened, my heart pounding against my ribs. I kept my breathing steady, my mind racing. If it was a person, they weren't acting normal. They weren't calling out, weren't making their presence known. If it was an animal, it was acting wrong. Then I heard the breathing. It was faint, just beyond the thin layer of fabric, slow and deliberate. And then, a voice, low, hoarse, a whisper just above a breath, said my name. My stomach twisted into a knot, my blood running ice cold. No one should have known my name. No one should have been out here. I stayed completely still. The voice came again, barely above a whisper. It sounded wrong, like someone trying to imitate a human voice but failing. There was something off about it, something unnatural in the way it stretched the syllables. My finger hovered over the trigger. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. The breathing faded. The presence outside my tent was gone. I lay there, frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and at some point, I drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep. When I woke up, the sun was rising, casting a dull gray light through the trees. I sat up quickly, rifle still clutched in my hands. The forest was back to normal. Birds chirped in the distance. The leaves rustled in the breeze. But something was wrong. My campsite had been disturbed. My backpack was unzipped, the contents strewn across the ground. My food was untouched, but my clothes had been pulled from my bag, as if someone or something had been searching through them. And then I saw them. Footprints. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks. Bare footprints, large and misshapen, circling my tent in the dirt. Something had been out there. Something that wasn't human. I didn't waste any time. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, shoving everything into my truck and starting the engine. As I drove away, my hands were tight on the wheel, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again. The forest loomed behind me, silent and still. But I knew something had been out there that night, and it had known my name. There was something about camping alone that had always appealed to me. It wasn't about being brave or proving anything. It was just the quiet, the peace. When you're out there, deep in the woods, away from all the noise and people, it's like you're stepping out of the world for a while. That's what I was looking for when I drove up to the Blackwood Forest. It was mid-September, and the weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, with the leaves just starting to turn red and gold. I'd booked a few days off work, packed up my tent and sleeping bag, and hit the road. The plan was simple: drive up, park the car at one of the designated spots near the trailhead, and hike out to a secluded spot where I could pitch my tent. I wasn't aiming for anything fancy, just a couple of nights under the stars, maybe a few hikes, maybe some reading by the campfire. The drive up was uneventful. I left early in the morning, when the roads were still mostly empty, and made it to Blackwood by noon. The parking lot at the trailhead was practically deserted, just one other car, a dusty old sedan with faded license plates. That suited me just fine. The fewer people, the better. I shouldered my pack, locked the car, and started down the trail. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the gravel path and the occasional rustle of leaves as a squirrel or bird darted by. I walked for a couple of hours, following the narrow, winding trail deeper into the forest. The farther I went, the quieter it got. By the time I found a good spot to set up camp, a small clearing near a stream, I felt like I was a million miles from civilization. I pitched my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and set up a small fire. It took a bit of work to get the fire going. The wood was damp from a rainstorm earlier in the week, but eventually, I managed to coax a small flame to life. I sat by the fire, eating a sandwich I'd packed for lunch, and watched as the sun dipped lower in the sky, turning the trees to silhouettes. That night, I slept like a rock. The second day passed without incident. I spent the morning exploring the area around my campsite, following the stream as it wound its way through the woods. I didn't see another soul all day, and by the time I got back to camp, I was feeling relaxed and calm in a way I hadn't in months. I cooked a simple dinner over the fire, canned beans and some bread, and sat there for a while, staring into the flames and listening to the sounds of the forest. That's when I noticed it. A footprint. It was just a few feet from my tent, partially obscured by fallen leaves, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had been here. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. The trailhead was miles away, and I hadn't seen any other campers or hikers all day. But the footprint was fresh, too fresh to be more than a few hours old. I looked around, but there was no sign of anyone, just trees and shadows and the flickering glow of my campfire. I told myself it was nothing, probably just another hiker who had passed through earlier and I hadn't noticed. Maybe they'd taken a wrong turn or something. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept over me as I crawled into my tent that night. I double-checked the zipper, making sure it was closed tight, and lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the forest. I didn't sleep as well that night. Every little noise, every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves seemed louder, sharper, like someone or something was out there, just beyond the circle of light cast by my dying campfire. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy and out of sorts. The uneasy feeling from the night before hadn't gone away, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I packed up my gear, thinking I might cut the trip short and head back to the car. But as I was taking down my tent, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The footprint was gone. The patch of dirt where I'd seen it the night before was now covered in a thin layer of leaves and twigs, like someone had tried to hide it. I stood there, staring at the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. Someone had been here, and they didn't want me to know. I didn't waste any more time. I stuffed the last of my gear into my backpack, doused the campfire, and set off down the trail. I wasn't panicking yet, but I didn't want to stick around and find out who had been sneaking around my campsite in the middle of the night. The trail seemed different on the way back. The trees felt closer, the shadows deeper. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was nothing there, just the empty forest. By mid-afternoon, I was starting to relax. The unease that had been gnawing at me all morning was beginning to fade, and I was starting to think that maybe I'd overreacted. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the trail, about 50 feet ahead of me, just standing there, He was tall, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders and a shaved head. He was wearing dirty jeans and a black jacket, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me. My mouth went dry. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. "I'm just passing through," I said. "I don't want any trouble." Still nothing. And then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made your skin crawl, like he knew something you didn't. I turned and ran. I don't remember much of the next few minutes. Just the sound of my boots pounding against the dirt, the trees blurring past me, and the adrenaline surging through my veins. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot. But when I got there, my car was gone. First, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. But as I looked around, my heart sinking, I realized the truth. Someone had taken my car. I was stranded. I spent the next hour hiding in the woods near the parking lot, trying to figure out what to do. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. I thought about trying to flag down a passing car, but the road was deserted. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the trail. I pressed myself against the trunk of a tree, holding my breath. And then I saw him, the same man from the trail. He was carrying something in his hand, something shiny, a knife. I didn't wait to see what he was going to do. I ran. I ran deeper into the woods, away from the trail, away from the parking lot, away from him. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The sun was setting by the time I finally stopped, my lungs burning and my legs shaking. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, and tried to think. I had no food, no water, no map. And somewhere out there, in the dark, a man with a knife was hunting me. The next 2 days were a blur. I wandered through the woods, lost and terrified, trying to stay one step ahead of him. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The smile, the knife, the way he had looked at me like I was prey. I don't know how I survived, but somehow I did. On the third day, I stumbled out of the woods onto a dirt road. A trucker picked me up and drove me to the nearest town, where I finally called the police. They never found him. I was never the kind of person to camp alone. The idea of it always felt strange. Being out in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but trees and open land around you. But that year, I needed a break from everything. Work had been exhausting. My personal life was a mess, and I wanted nothing more than to get away from the city, even if just for a few days. I decided to camp in a remote forest area, a few hours away from the nearest town. It wasn't a well-known spot, but I had done some research and found a place where people occasionally went for hunting and fishing. It was deep in the woods, far from any major roads, which meant there wouldn't be too many people around. That was exactly what I wanted. Peace, quiet, and no distractions. I packed my gear. A good tent, sleeping bag, enough food and water for 3 days, a hunting knife, and a small hatchet for firewood. I didn't bring a gun, something I would regret later. My plan was simple. Drive up, hike a few miles into the woods, set up camp near a small river I had seen on a map, and just relax for a couple of days. The drive was easy, but once I got off the main road, things changed. The dirt path leading into the woods was rough, filled with deep potholes and uneven ground. My truck bounced and shook as I navigated through it, moving deeper and deeper into the forest. The further I went, the less the road resembled a road. Eventually, I reached a point where it was impossible to go any further. The trees were too thick and the ground was too rough. I got out, grabbed my backpack and started walking. The air was crisp, the smell of damp earth and pine filling my lungs. It was peaceful, the kind of silence you don't get in the city. No car horns, no voices, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. After about an hour of walking, I reached the river. It was smaller than I expected, but still good enough for what I needed. The water was clear, flowing gently over smooth rocks. I found a decent spot on a slight incline, surrounded by tall trees. It felt safe, hidden from any trails or roads, yet open enough for a good view of my surroundings. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and got everything in order. By the time the sun started to set, I had a small fire going, my gear organized, and dinner cooking. It was the perfect setup. That first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, ate my food, and listened to the sounds of the forest. Occasionally, I'd hear a rustling in the distance, probably a deer or some other small animal. Nothing unusual. It wasn't until the second night that things started feeling wrong. I had spent the day exploring, walking along the river, and just enjoying the solitude. By evening, I was back at camp, cooking my meal over the fire. That's when I noticed it. A sound. At first, it was faint, almost unnoticeable. A soft rustling further in the trees. It didn't seem like much. I had heard plenty of animals moving around. But as the minutes passed, I realized something was different. It wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate. Not the quick, aimless movements of a deer or raccoon. Someone or something was moving out there. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just on edge because I was alone. But then, as I sat by the fire, staring into the darkness beyond the trees, I felt it. That feeling. The one you get when someone is watching you. My skin prickled. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My instincts screamed at me. Something was out there. I slowly turned my head, scanning the trees, looking for anything unusual. First, I saw nothing. Just darkness. The thick outline of trees swaying slightly in the wind. Then, for the briefest moment, I saw it. A shape, a figure, not an animal, not a deer, person, standing deep in the trees, just beyond the firelight. I froze, my heart pounding. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who would be out here, this far from any roads or trails? I squinted, trying to see more clearly, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, barely visible between the trees. I didn't know what to do. Calling out felt like a bad idea. If it was a lost hiker, why hadn't they made any noise? Why were they just standing there? For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, as if they realized I had seen them, they stepped back, slowly, deliberately, and then they were gone. The darkness swallowed them up. I stayed frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. I listened, trying to hear footsteps, movement, anything, but there was nothing. Just the crackling of my fire and the distant sound of the river. I grabbed my hatchet, gripping it tightly. My mind was racing. Should I pack up and leave? But it was already late. Hiking back in the dark wasn't a great idea either. I decided to stay awake, keeping my fire going, watching the trees. Hours passed and nothing else happened. By the time the sun started to rise, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I didn't venture far. I stayed near camp, keeping my hatchet close. The whole time, I felt uneasy. Every sound made me flinch. Then, in the late afternoon, I found something. Footprints. Not mine. They were near my camp, in the dirt just outside my tent. Someone had been here. I followed them a little, my heart pounding. They led back into the woods, toward where I had seen the figure the night before. But then, after about 20 feet, they just stopped. No sign of them turning around. No other tracks leading away. Just gone. I didn't waste any more time. I packed my gear, threw everything into my backpack, and left. I hiked as fast as I could, barely stopping for breaks. When I finally reached my truck, I felt a wave of relief. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. But as I turned onto the dirt road, heading back toward civilization, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For the briefest moment, standing just at the edge of the trees, I saw it again. The figure, watching me leave. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I drove until I was miles away, until I saw houses and streetlights and other people. I never went back to that forest. Never told anyone what happened. But even now, years later, sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still get that feeling that someone is watching, and I wonder if I had stayed just one more night, what would have happened? It was late June when I decided to take a solo camping trip through southern France. I had recently turned 27 and felt restless, stuck in the monotonous rhythm of office work back in London. I needed something different, something real. After weeks of planning, I packed my gear: a sturdy tent, a sleeping bag, basic food supplies, and a small first aid kit, and booked a flight to Marseille. From there, I rented a car and drove deep into the countryside, where the landscape gradually shifted from bustling towns to endless fields, dense forests, and winding roads. I had chosen a relatively remote area near the Verdun Gorge, a breathtaking canyon known for its turquoise river and rugged cliffs. It seemed perfect, isolated but not completely off the map. I wasn't reckless enough to wander too far from civilization. The first couple of days were peaceful. I set up my tent near a quiet patch of woods, close enough to the river that I could hear the gentle flow of water at night. The air smelled of pine and wildflowers, and during the day, I explored nearby trails, took photographs, and read books by the water. On the third day, things started to change. It was subtle at first, just a feeling. I had hiked about 5 kilometers from my campsite to check out an abandoned farmhouse I'd seen on the map. The house was little more than a crumbling shell, with ivy creeping up its stone walls and shattered windows that stared out like empty eyes. Inside, the air was cool and damp, and the floor was littered with broken tiles and decaying wood. I didn't linger long. As I turned to leave, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping past one of the windows. I froze, my heart racing, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, I was alone in an unfamiliar place, and it was easy for the mind to play tricks. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me as I made my way back to camp. By the time I got there, the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the ground. I built a small fire, cooked some instant noodles, and tried to relax. But that night, I slept fitfully, waking up every hour to the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs. The next day, I decided to stay close to camp. I spent the morning gathering firewood and the afternoon sketching in my journal. By early evening, the unease had faded, and I was beginning to feel like myself again. I even laughed at how jumpy I'd been the day before. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept in, the feeling returned, stronger this time, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It was around midnight when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and far too close to my tent. I held my breath, straining to listen. At first, I thought it might be an animal, a deer or maybe a wild boar, but the steps were too heavy, too measured. They circled my tent once, twice, and then stopped. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the darkness. Eventually, I mustered the courage to unzip my tent just a fraction and peer out. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint red glow over the campsite. I didn't see anyone, but the woods beyond the clearing were a wall of blackness, impenetrable and silent. The next morning, I packed up my gear and moved my camp to a different spot about 2 kilometers away, deeper into the forest. I told myself it was just to get a change of scenery, but deep down, I knew I was running. I spent the day on edge, jumping at every snap of a twig and every rustle of leaves. By evening, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I set up my tent near a rocky outcrop and built a fire, hoping the flames would keep whatever was out there at bay. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the fire, clutching a heavy branch I'd sharpened into a crude weapon. Every so often, I thought I heard footsteps in the distance, but they never came closer. When dawn finally broke, I felt a wave of relief so overwhelming I almost cried. I decided I'd had enough. It wasn't worth it anymore. The beauty of the wilderness, the sense of adventure. None of it mattered if I didn't feel safe. I packed up my camp and started hiking back toward my car. The trail was overgrown in places, and I had to stop frequently to check my map and GPS. By midday, I was sweaty, hungry, and irritated, but I was making progress. According to my GPS, I was less than a kilometer from the small dirt road where I'd parked. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the trail about 50 meters ahead. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but as I got closer, I realized something was off. The person wasn't moving. They were just standing there, facing me. I stopped, my mouth going dry. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I took a step back and the figure took a step forward. That's when I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. Branches whipped at my face and roots threatened to trip me, but I kept going, driven by pure terror. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and fast, matching my pace. I burst out onto the dirt road and saw my car parked a few meters away. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. Finally, I managed to unlock the door, throw my backpack inside, and scramble into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure had stopped at the edge of the woods, just watching. I couldn't make out their face, but I could feel their eyes on me. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away, not daring to slow down until I was miles from the forest. I didn't stop driving until I reached Marseille. I checked into a hotel near the airport, locked the door, and spent the night wide awake, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I caught the first flight back to London. It's been months now, and I still don't know what happened out there. Maybe it was just a local messing with me, some sick prank to scare off tourists. Or maybe it was something worse. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. All I know is that I'll never go camping alone again. I never liked camping alone. Not because I was scared of the woods, being outdoors had always felt natural to me, but because I knew what people were capable of. You read about it all the time. People go missing in national parks, their bodies never found, or found too late with no explanation. Sometimes it's the wilderness itself that gets them. Other times it's something else. This trip wasn't planned well. I had been feeling restless for weeks, like I needed to get away. My job had been wearing me down, and I figured some time away from everything would help. I packed up my old truck, threw my gear in the back, and drove out to a state forest a few hours from home. It wasn't the most remote spot, but it was far enough that I could have some quiet. I got there late in the afternoon, parked at a dirt pull-off, and hiked in about 3 miles. There weren't any official campsites, but dispersed camping was allowed. The spot I picked was near a slow-moving river, tucked back off the trail where I wouldn't be bothered. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and settled in as the sun started sinking behind the trees. By the time the fire was crackling and my dinner was cooking, I finally started to relax. The woods were quiet except for the usual sounds: crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of leaves. But as the night stretched on, I started noticing something else. It was small at first, the feeling of being watched. A sound I couldn't quite place, a branch breaking far too close. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was alone after all. My mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw something. It was just past midnight. The fire had died down, and I was sitting in my camping chair, listening to the river, when I caught movement between the trees. A shadow. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But as I squinted into the darkness, I realized it was standing still, watching. I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't alone out here. I told myself it could have been another camper, maybe a hunter, but something about the way they stood, just barely out of sight, made my skin crawl. They weren't making noise. They weren't walking through the brush like a normal person would. They were just waiting. I slowly reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut through the trees, lighting up empty space where the figure had been. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the wind pushing through the leaves. I tried to shake it off, but the unease stayed. I doused the fire and climbed into my tent, zipping it up tight. I had my knife close and my headlamp within reach. I wasn't about to fall asleep, not with that feeling hanging in the air. The forest was too quiet. An hour passed, maybe two. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, careful, coming from the direction where I'd seen the shadow. I held my breath. They stopped just outside my tent. I gripped the handle of my knife, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The seconds stretched out. I could hear breathing, low, steady. Someone was standing right outside. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, a hand pressed against the fabric of my tent. I lunged. My knife slashed through the nylon, tearing open a gash as I scrambled out, my headlamp flicking on. My heart slammed against my ribs as I whipped the light around. No one was there. The woods were still, silent. The only sound was my own breathing, ragged and sharp. But I knew what I had felt. The handprint was still there, pressed into the fabric. I wasn't waiting around. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed what I could into it, and threw it over my shoulder. I kept my knife in one hand, my light in the other. My truck was 3 miles away. It didn't matter how late it was. I was getting the hell out. The walk back was the longest I'd ever done. Every few steps, I stopped and listened. I kept checking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never left. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, matching mine. I sped up. So did they. I broke into a jog. The footsteps followed. Branches snapped behind me. I didn't dare look. I just ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life. My pack bounced against my shoulders, my flashlight shaking wildly in my hand. The trail blurred beneath me. Then ahead I saw it. The dirt road. My truck. I pushed harder, my legs burning. I fumbled my keys out of my pocket before I even reached the door. A sound exploded from the woods behind me. A scream. Not an animal. Not human either. Something in between. I wrenched the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into gear and peeled out, gravel spraying as I hit the road. My headlights lit up the trees, and there, just at the edge of the light, a figure stood watching, tall, motionless. I didn't slow down. I drove until the forest was behind me, until I was back on the highway, until the fear in my chest finally started to loosen. I didn't go back for my tent. I never went camping alone again, and I never figured out who or what was in those woods that night. But I know one thing for sure. I wasn't supposed to leave. It was 2018 when I found myself doing something I never thought I would. Camping in a graveyard. Not for some thrill-seeking adventure or a dare, but out of necessity. I was between places and I didn't have the money for a motel. I had been driving for hours through rural Tennessee, the kind of backroads where gas stations were few and far between, and cell service came and went like a bad dream. I wasn't completely homeless, but I was close enough. The only thing keeping me afloat was my old pickup truck and a battered tent stuffed in the back. The graveyard wasn't my first choice. I had hoped to find a rest stop or even an abandoned barn, but by the time night came, I had no luck. The last bit of daylight was fading behind the hills when I turned down a dirt road, hoping it would lead me somewhere I could stay without getting run off. It was only after I pulled in that I realized where I was. The place wasn't marked with a sign, just a rusted old gate hanging off one hinge and a narrow gravel path leading in. But I could see the headstones, dozens of them. Some standing tall, others leaning like they had grown tired over the years. I told myself it wasn't so bad. It was just a place like any other. The dead didn't bother me. It was the living that always seemed to cause trouble. So, I pulled my truck as far back as I could, near a patch of trees, and set up my tent just beyond the reach of the headstones. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not the normal nighttime sounds you'd expect. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the distant rustle of leaves when the wind picked up. It made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. I had been driving since morning, and my body was begging for rest. I unrolled my sleeping bag, made sure my truck was locked, and settled in for the night. The ground was hard, and every time I shifted, I could feel roots pressing into my back. It wasn't comfortable, but I had slept in worse places. I told myself to close my eyes and ignore the feeling creeping up my spine. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it wasn't. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, not crunching through leaves, but moving along the gravel path. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound stopped, then started again, this time closer. I told myself it could be an animal, a deer maybe, but the steps were too steady, too human. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I reached for the flashlight I had left beside me. I flicked it on and aimed it toward the sound. Nothing. The path was empty. The graves stood still. But I knew I had heard something. I knew I wasn't alone. I sat there for what felt like forever, gripping the flashlight, waiting for something to move. But nothing did. Finally, I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks. Long drives, lack of sleep, and an empty stomach could do that. I laid back down but didn't close my eyes. I kept the flashlight in my hand, just in case. Then, not long after, I heard something new. Not footsteps this time, but a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged through the dirt. It came from the far side of the graveyard, beyond the oldest headstones. I slowly unzipped the tent and shined my light toward the sound. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape shifting just at the edge of the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. I wasn't about to wait around to see what it was. My gut was telling me to leave, and I'd learned to trust it. I started packing up, stuffing my sleeping bag into the truck as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, but I kept moving. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The gravel path that had been empty minutes before wasn't empty anymore. There were footprints in the dirt, fresh ones, and they weren't mine. They came from the far side of the graveyard, leading straight toward my tent. I didn't waste another second. I threw everything into the truck, not caring if it was packed right, and jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life and I hit the gas. Gravel sprayed behind me as I sped back to the main road, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 20 miles away. I parked under the bright lights and just sat there, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking. My skin was cold with sweat. I don't know what I heard that night. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in that graveyard, and I never will be again.